If Doug Burgum runs for president, will you support him?
I always support Doug in whatever he does and moves forward on that. I'm a big, obviously, I think he's done a great job for North Dakota.
Let me ask you this then. If he runs for president, are you going to run for governor?
Again, we're a long ways away from any of those things.
We told you he wasn't chicken, okay? We told you that he didn't just ditch out on us last week. He ended up having to vote. So isn't this weird? I'm a Democrat, he's a Republican, and I'm sticking up for him. Let's get him on. Congressman Kelly Armstrong. Congressman, good to have you back on News and Views.
You know, Joe, I actually really appreciate that because you actually know how this place works, and you know me well enough to know that I'm a lot of things, but if we can't make it, we'll reschedule.
Yeah, exactly. And I thank you for that because I think all audiences need to have a chance to hear what you have to say. I want to throw this at you. Today, obviously, the big news of the day, any news cycle has President Biden running for re-election. He announced by video today. We know that the gap between anyone potentially running against Donald Trump, former president, for the Republican nomination keeps widening. And so I don't think you have to take a big risk here to say that Donald Trump will probably be the nominee on your side of the aisle. My point is they're both going to be in their 80s during this next term. Is that too old? Is that too old to be president?
No, I just don't think it is. I don't like age tests. I think a lot of it is based on I've had a lot of conversations with 80-year-olds all across the state of North Dakota and all across this country. And just to say that you're some of the smartest, most intelligent people I know are getting toward that place in age. And then there's others that, have different issues involved with aging. So I don't think a means test. I will say this, it's over the last 15 years, this legacy, prior to 2016, it was Bush, Clinton, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Clinton, Biden, and Trump. We have to figure out a way, I think, to get a more robust and different, less institutionalized thing. Politics is as dynamic as it's ever been, but also at the same time, it seems like this legacy part of this just goes too far. And I think people, that's why we have primaries. I'm different than you. I think that, we're still a long ways away, and I don't think anybody's entitled to it, particularly on our side where Donald Trump's a former president, but he's also not an incumbent, and there's a long time between now and next November.
Yeah, but the problem you have, Congressman, with your primaries, and I like primaries, is that you have winner take all. Donald Trump would have a way better chance of being beat for this nomination if you didn't have winner take all. And so I don't know if you've ever considered that in any of your conversations, but it sure seems to me like the rig is on the Republican side and on the Democratic side. The rules are kind of stacked for those people with money.
Yeah, money's never been more important in politics than it is now, and I think that's the same as it's always been. But it's also never been less determinative. I think at the presidential level, that's not entirely true. The political industrial complex is alive and well. And I know you guys the Democrats tried to redo their super delegate thing and all of that. But yeah, there's always ways you can improve this process.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about Congress itself. Obviously, you have the debt ceiling coming up. When you look at where you're at, Leader McCarthy was a man that you supported and were there all along when it came to him. Where do you see this debt ceiling fight? How do you see it shaking out?
Well, we're going to put a bill on the floor, hopefully by the end of this week. We're going to pass it over to the Senate. I sure hope we get there, because if we don't, I think the alternative is default or a clean increase. And I think both of those answers are, quite frankly, unacceptable to the American people.
Well, and that's the point, though, isn't it? It's something. Here's a point I made, Kelly, which was this, that one party claims to be the fiscal hawks, that they're the fiscally conservative. Your party wasn't. During the Trump administration, you guys, if you look at where the debt went, you can't exactly stand on a record of reduction of debt. How are we supposed to trust your party to rein in debt when, in fact, you raised the debt during the Trump administration?
Well, I think two things. One, it was a weird place for me because I got called a rhino for not sending checks to people whether they needed them or not. So take the COVID part of this out of it. And I don't know if that's fair or unfair, but there are several votes in Congress that I took that I would go back and take again, Joel, so I'm not making excuses for them. But we took them at a very unique time in history that I can only imagine that would be the only time in history we did it. And you're right. I mean, I don't know what's brought a lot of my colleagues on my side of the aisle back to this, but I never voted for a Trump budget either under President Trump for my 2 years here. I think the $31 trillion in debt and the $1.1 trillion in deficit is the single biggest threat we face outside of all of the new threats that pop up on a daily basis. And we have to figure out a way to get our spending under control. But you're exactly right. I mean, both parties are completely to blame for this.
So fix it. I mean, it isn't as though you hadn't, as a leader in the North Dakota legislature, and I realize way small compared to what we're talking about here, but you knew what it was like to balance a budget. You knew what it was like to be at this end of the legislative session and have no choice but to make sure the budget was balanced. I mean, fix this. If Kelly Armstrong was not a congressman and he was a king, and you just had the opportunity to say, all right, I can balance this book, what would you do? Name three things you would do.
One, I would set caps. I would set aggressive caps on fiscal spending. Two, I would figure out ways in which we can grow our economy, get infrastructure, permitting reform, structural reform, the types of things that really work. And then I do think we have to have a longer, bigger conversation. Particularly, I actually really like the work requirement portion of this bill because it deals with one subset of our population. And it's important to keep in mind that whether it's work benefits or Medicaid, it's 20 hours and it's only for able-bodied adults who do not have minor kids at home. And I think that has a long-term structural impact in society as well. So those are three things I would be really comfortable doing immediately.
Can you balance this
and
budget?
Do they solve it?
Go ahead.
Well, I think the only way you can balance the budget out here in a realistic way, because, this is a 20-year problem with 2-year election cycles. I think the most realistic path forward on a balanced budget would be a 20-year balanced budget. Unfortunately, politics gets in the way of that on both sides, by the way. There's very different degrees because there's two different sides to this. You can either really do massive spending reform there's two different thoughts. When you have the House, the Senate, and the White House. And then the other school of thought is you can only do it when you have divided government because everybody has skin in the game. I don't know which one of those schools of thought is accurate, but I know which one we're in right now. So I know which one we should try.
Is there any pain that you're willing to sacrifice? Let's use that word. Is there any sacrifice you're willing to give for your state? Because everybody wants Congress shook up except for their congressman. Farmers, there's no question whatsoever that farmers receive subsidy from the federal government. Are you willing to take a look at less subsidization of agriculture as part of balancing a budget?
I am willing to look at all of it, provided that the skin in the game is as equal is a bad word, but as broadly dispersed against the entire economy as possible. One of my biggest frustrations when I first ran for Congress, and this has nothing, by the way, the debt ceiling vote in the House, this is a Republican fight. It's up to us to get 218. I don't think we're going to get a lot of help on the other side of the aisle, and I understand why we're not. But one of my biggest frustrations is you get some of these conservative groups that send you a list before they're going to talk about endorsing you or not. And one of the things that always frustrated me with those groups is they disproportionately negatively affected rural states. And I'm willing to put anything on the table, provided everybody across the economy, rural, urban, Midwest, coastal, is in this fight together. And I think if we get to a place where we can actually sell that, I'll be honest with you. If we significantly could make a government trajectory on how we spend money and get our deficit under control, I'd be willing to take a vote to lose an election over that.
But Congressman, is that just a safe statement knowing it'll never happen?
Well, but here's what I won't do. I won't go vote against North Dakota ag producers when we're not putting everybody else in the same boat and dealing with this and saying we're all in it together. I'm a glass half full skeptic. I don't want to believe that we can't do this, because if we don't do it, we're going to have unbelievable sustainable problems. If you believe China is our biggest strategic adversary and threat in the 21st century, which I do, their plan is to win this fight without ever having to roll a tank or ever fire a shot. And the way they do it is through the economic and economic means, and us continuing to prioritize getting elected over getting our debt and deficit under control.
Text in. I will try to get these on to the congressman. Says, didn't you, Congressman, vote to raise the debt ceiling 3 times, no strings attached during the Trump presidency?
I did not. I voted no.
Okay. So when you say that you're going to need every vote from the Republican side, give us a little insight into where you're at now, because you have a diverse caucus, to say the least.
The background of this is that it started from, for people who don't know, and God bless you for having real lives and not knowing the inner workings of D.C. sometimes, but budgets and these types of deals are usually done from the top down. This has not been done from the top down on the Republican side. We have gotten all the different ideological groups and caucuses in our conference together over the course of 2 months, negotiating, meeting together. I think we're close. This is the problem with a 4 or 5 vote majority. I read it somewhere in the media today. I think it was a really good analogy, and I try not to use sports analogies in politics, but I'm going to do it. It's like now we're on the 2-yard line, and we're going to do a dive to and try and plunge in the end zone, and we're going to keep working for the rest of the week and see if we can get everybody to agree. Because there's a tough vote for different people for a lot of different reasons. But the point to this is to make sure we get primarily Senate Democrats who have different electoral and philosophical reasons for wanting to engage in this conversation, get them something where they can start engaging. So I don't know. We're going to try. We're close, but close doesn't get you anywhere in politics. We got to get to 218.
But 2 things happened. Number one, you have a caucus that isn't as big as what you had hoped it would be after the midterm. And both you and I may differ on what the reason is, but on some of that we might agree. Then you had a leadership vote that went on and on. What did it take? 15 ballots? I mean, those two things are a major hurdle for you to cross.
I think the leadership vote, the first one, absolutely, and there's no doubt nationally and all across, Republicans underperformed in the last election cycle, and we should learn from the mistakes that were made as to why that happened. The second one, I actually disagree. I think the leadership fight puts us in the best chance possible to get this across the line, because we learned right away at the beginning of this Congress that if you try and jam something through from the top down, you're always going to lose more than 5 people. So I actually think the leadership fight and the relationships that got built over that give us the best chance of passing.
Well, let me push back on that a little bit. I mean,
sure.
Didn't the leadership fight that you went under put those arch conservatives, which are a minority in your caucus, in charge of your caucus?
No, it brought them to the table. And that was one of their biggest concerns. But whether the arch conservatives are in charge or not, they control more than 5 votes. So if leadership tries to do anything and push it down, it doesn't matter if it's northeastern moderates in Biden districts or the far right of the Freedom Caucus. You cannot pass anything in a 5-vote majority without ever getting everybody's buy-in, and I think we learned that really early.
I love sports analogies, so let me use one. Right out of left field to you, Congressman Armstrong. If Doug Burgum, which he appears is working at, runs for president, he went to Iowa already, is making votes based upon what this does for him nationally with his popularity versus where he said he stood in the past. If Doug Burgum runs for president, will you support him?
I always support Doug in whatever he does and moves forward on that. I'm a big, obviously, I think he's done a great job for North Dakota. I'd push back on the intro, but we might not have enough time to do that. I think Doug makes the decisions he makes because he thinks it's the best policy for North Dakota. But we're a long way from having to worry about any of those things.
So,
I don't ask for a lot of endorsements, and I don't give a lot of endorsements. That's just one. I'm not sure anybody really particularly cares what an at-large member of the U.S. House of Representatives says. I know I've never voted based on who somebody else is supporting.
Okay,
but I support.
That's fair, Congressman. Let me ask you this then: if he runs for president, are you going to run for governor?
Again, we're a long ways away from any of those things. I'd lie to you if I would. I would be lying to you, Joel, if I said I wouldn't consider it. I would never do that. I love the state of North Dakota. I think the governor of the state of North Dakota might be one of the best jobs in the whole world. But I've also learned a long time ago the best way to do something in the future is be good at what you're doing now.
That's an honest man's answer. I appreciate it, Congressman. I'm glad to see that you aren't hanging out with Marjorie Taylor Greene all the time and you don't get the last chair in the House, okay?
Well, we're one of the busiest offices in Congress, and I'm proud of that. But sometimes it's musical chairs, and there's seats left, and there's seats that aren't left.
Okay. I don't know schedule-wise if you're going to be able to visit with the guys, but I'm going to be on the next honor flight in a couple days. Hope to see you then, Congressman.
I'm going to be there.